My name is Akosua Darkwah. I teach sociology at the University of Ghana, Legon. So Ghana Must Go is a reference to a bag, a particular kind of bag. It's usually striped, red, black, and white, or red, blue, and white, and comes in different sizes. And most people think of that bag when they think about Ghana Must Go. But the phrase is also a reference to an incident that took place in early 1983, so that's 40 years ago. It's a reference to an expulsion order that the Nigerian government basically issued, requiring all Ghanaians without the proper documentation to leave the country in 2 weeks. They extended it for another 2 weeks basically, but 17 January, an order came out that said by the end of January they should just get out of the country. So Ghana in the 1970s faced a lot of economic difficulties. Towards the end of the 1970s, life was very hard. In fact, there's a statistic that the minimum wage could only buy a quarter of a tube of yam. So people really had a hard time making ends meet in the country, and therefore they were looking for places where they could go where it would be easier to make a daily living. When they got to Nigeria, they did different things. So there were those who were professionals, teachers, lecturers, nurses. In fact, many Nigerians, and not just Nigerians, but also across the West African sub-region, the Anglophone parts, did have teachers in secondary school who were Nigerian. And I'm sure many of those listening who have friends and family members living in other West African countries can attest to this. There were many teachers of science, of maths, of English in secondary schools who were Ghanaian. Remember that Ghana had a fairly high level of quality education thanks to Nkrumah's policies of the 1960s. So compared to the other parts of the continent, we had a professional class who were in Nigeria at the time. But there were also those who went to apply trades of different sorts. So there were carpenters, there were masons, there were quite a number of people working as construction workers. Or you worked as a trader, some people worked as shoe shine boys, and so on and so forth. So basically, all kinds of people went to Nigeria, both professional and non-professional Ghanaians. No. So the eviction order was for those without proper documentation. If you had been invited by a university to teach at the university, you had paperwork, so you were not being asked to leave. However, if you live in a country where suddenly members of your country or your country folk are being asked to leave on account of documentation, you get a sense that you are not welcome. So even if you have the proper documentation, you don't necessarily feel welcome at that point. In any case, for an ordinary Nigerian who sees you on the street and hears you speak as a Ghanaian, at that point, they are not going to be asking you to show them their proper documentation to determine if you belong there or not. So you'll be read as a Ghanaian, and there's a sense that Ghanaians, many of whom are there, don't have the paperwork and should therefore be leaving. So although technically it applied to those without paperwork, and those are the ones who left immediately, many of the other Ghanaians who did not have to leave felt a sense that they needed to find another place to move to as well. Well, I don't think they were accounted for in that sense. We don't have a memorial, for example, that lists even the number, let alone their names. So I'm sure there are families who don't know exactly whether their relative who went to Nigeria is still alive or dead. There are many accounts of people dying at the borders and being buried under coconut trees. There are no markers for those people. If we are lucky, people do know their full names. But you know how in Ghana, people know others by their nicknames. So for all you know, he knows that his friend Bro died. But if you ask him what's Bro's name, full name, he may not actually know. So it's difficult to say we accounted for them. In any case, from where I sit, a proper accounting for them would be documentation, would be teaching of this story in our history classes, so that Ghanaian students, Ghanaian adults know exactly how much of this happened, how many people died. It doesn't have to be accurate to the last digit, but a sense of, did we lose 1,000, did we lose 2,000, did we lose 500 would be good. And we don't have that. So we've done interviews with 36 Ghanaians, 12 women and 24 men across southern Ghana who went to Nigeria and returned. And basically, when they think back on that period, they don't think about it with pleasant thoughts. It's not something they would like to repeat. It's not a place they would like to go back to. Well, so there were two kinds. There were those whose families were very happy to see them. So in one account, the mother had 5 children, all of whom had gone to Nigeria. So for that woman, she wanted them back, dead or alive. And it didn't matter whether they came empty-handed or not. Others were not so welcoming because they expected that these family members would come back with something to show for it. So you get both sides, those who were received with open arms, for whom their mere presence was good enough, and those who were expected to have come back home with something to show for their time away. So actually, those who were much younger, some of the Ghanaians, especially the boys, they went as boys, not as men, 13, 14. And they, at the time, went back. In fact, there were some who went back soon afterwards. So by 1984, they were back in Nigeria. But many of the older men and the women were not interested in going back and did not go back. You have to also remember that 1983 was a difficult time for Ghana in general. That was the year of the fires and the bushfires and the accompanying famine, basically, right? And for those of us who are old enough, there was actually a phrase known as the Rawlings chain, which referred to just how emaciated people looked like. Of course, that happened later in the year. In the early part of the year when this eviction order was passed, the international community responded, like the Red Cross, responded by sending in some goods to help with people who had to be evicted and had nothing to show for it. But that came in February. People had been evicted and were leaving by the end of January. So the response did come. We can debate whether it was quick enough and whether it was good enough. But the international community did respond, and they attempted to address the issue that had been created. Well, for me, I've been part of this project because I think that history is important. We need to understand where we've come from to be able to understand both our present condition, our present situation, and especially to understand our future. If you don't know where you've come from, you can't quite tell where you are going. And so I'd like to encourage everybody to visit the exhibition to get a sense of what happened at that time, especially for the Ghanaians who are too young to have experienced it. For those of us who are old enough to come and see the exhibition, to make sure that we have the facts right, and also to sort of commemorate that period, to honor the memories of those who died, and also to honor the strength and resilience of those who survived that period.